welcome to this final episode of at least this season of IHE profiles related to HL7 FHIR standard, organized by HL7 Finland. And our expert on the matter is John Moehrke. So, John, please take it away.
Thank you. Today is going to be the IHE scheduling profile, one that has just recently been released for trial implementation. I'm going to turn my screen off so that it doesn't hold up things. This IHE scheduling profile allows access to and booking of appointments for patients. So it's kind of focused on that perspective. And like I said, it's rather brand new. So if there's questions, I may or may not be able to answer them, but when we get to that, we'll talk about it. So there is some history behind this. I'll talk through the use cases, rather simple use cases, but important distinctions. Of course, the actors, the transactions, and then we'll get to questions. So this profile has its basis in an Argonaut scheduling implementation guide. Argonaut is a U.S. consortium that has worked on a couple of different things. They were also, one of the predecessors to many things like SMART or even US Core. This scheduling profile that they have is based on STU3, and there wasn't interest within the Argonaut group to evolve this. So Vasile worked with Argonaut and IHE, and we have a understanding to take over the project. So we pull it in, and of course, in order to go to R4, there's certainly some things that will happen to it. And I think there's probably yet going to be more things to happen to it. But the bulleted list here is the things that make it different from the Argonaut scheduling implementation guide. So it's based on R4. It's intended for international use, where Argonaut was US-centric. It doesn't have some of the required bindings that were in the scheduling implementation guide. It used to, bind to US Core, those kinds of things. So it's rather free of that. And indeed, we look to the IHE equivalent profiles in those cases. So there are these operations, find and hold and book. We'll get into those. Those are transactions that you'll see. There is a separate added transaction to support things like searching for appointments. So you have an appointment, but you don't know the details about it. So a search was also added. And then there is some specific profiling that supports post transactions. So what is the scope? The scope is, to have some vendor agnostic specification for, booking appointments. So this provides the ability to book a patient-specific appointment. So it is patient-specific, but and it supports both that the patient could be the agent who is looking to book appointments, or it could be a practitioner booking on behalf of the patient. Usually, we discuss it as a cross-organizational practitioner, because primarily, if you're a organizational practitioner within your organization, you just probably use your internal appointment. But we specifically wanted to say, hey, the actual use case is more for a remote or a non-organizational practitioner. Excuse me. So it uses the appointment resource. It allows for you to ask for good possible appointment slots. And I use the word slot loosely because it actually is appointment resources based. And you can, if you need time, you can hold the appointment or you can book it. And like I said before, you can search on it. So some of the goals that we had when working with this was to support servers that were not natively FHIR. Many of the EHRs have a way to book appointments, but they don't have it exposed in a FHIR-based way. So we want to provide a FHIR API for any of that kind of booking needs. So we focused on the use cases and we focused on how to best make that appointment booking API utilizing FHIR, but not necessarily, requiring that the underlying booking or underlying appointment infrastructure had to be FHIR based. And in that way, we are using operations more because an operation allows for better, business rules on the back end to make decisions and create information that didn't exist before. And we don't really use the schedule or slot resources explicitly. We certainly don't forbid them from happening, but they're just really not part of the API definition. So a user can be the patient, or it could be a related person. Mom is setting up an appointment for son, those kinds of things. Or it could be this external practitioner, and we go through cross-organizational um, use cases there. You definitely have to have a patient identified. Argonaut would have bound to US core patient. Because we're IHE and we want to be international, we're using the PDQM profile. So there's some binding there, and we express that, hey, first you have to cling to your patient, then you can do this profile. So go look at PDQM, and it's not exactly just PDQM. If you're using PIXM to find your IDs, that's fine. If you're using PEM or those kinds of things. We use, of course, the security profiles from IHE, ATNA, IUA for the OAuth profiling, BOLP for the audit profiling, and PCF for consent. They're not tightly bound into here, but that's kind of the expectation, is that the security and privacy infrastructure is these other things that we have that are internationally designed. And then to discover the scheduling service endpoints, we have the MCSD. So this is a directory of service, for service discovery. We describe how this service would be listed in that directory, so that when you go looking in the directory for, hey, where is your scheduling endpoint? It's obvious how to get there. I think there is probably still some, excuse me, I think there's still some work on making that really clear and performant. So I, look forward to some early Connectathon improvements in the discovery side as well. So the use cases, I'm really not going to get into detail, but you can see here are the three use cases that we have. One is, hey, a doctor is post-hospital discharge wanting to schedule a follow-up with the PCP. So in this case, the user is the surgeon, so to speak. And in that case, they're looking for a good slot for the patient to show up at the PCP. This highlights that the user is potentially a clinician and that it's cross-organizational because it's going from the hospital to the PCP's scheduling endpoint. Scheduling aware use case, shows this idea that you might want to look and see what appointments this patient already has so that you can schedule the follow-up near an existing appointment, or certainly not over an existing appointment. So the second use case is driving towards needing the ability to find details about an appointment. Finding details about an appointment is also very important in order to understand all of the attributes about the appointment. Maybe they've forgotten, exactly where was this supposed to be at? Who was I seeing? Those kinds of things, so they can get a current copy of the appointment. And then the patient scheduling of an appointment. So the patient themselves, we do want to enable that case. So we get to actors and transactions. There are two actors. There's the scheduling client and there's this scheduling server. Rather simple from that perspective. There are 4 transactions. Find potential appointments is ITI 15, and that is, as you'll see on the next page, where you send in your qualifications for what kind of an appointment slot do you want. Book an appointment is where you indicate that you want that slot. There is an optional hold appointment. So the client would need to probe the server's capability statement to see whether the hold appointment is available, or just be, able to handle the failure modes of the operation not being there. But hold appointment, as you'll see, is kind of more, when you know that it's going to take a long time between your find potentials and your book, and you kind of want to just hold it, so that you're not committing to it, but you don't want somebody else to walk away with that spot. And this is kind of a common thing with various appointments. Certainly, you see it with airlines and the like. And then the last optional transaction is the find existing appointments. And again, you'll see this is that one to look for existing appointments. So find potential appointments. So this is a FHIR operation. And in that way, the server can create resources or modify resources. It can also go through business rules. It can look through details about the practitioners or the patients in question, and it will return a bundle of potential appointments. So their appointment resources, they exist, but they currently have not been committed to. They're not booked. So the output bundle could be one or more. That way the client can look at the multiples and further refine which ones they want to use. There isn't a algorithm that says what is the best. We leave that up to business rules, but we do define the input parameters. So the start date and end date is the period of time for which the appointments need to sit within. So between today and 10 days from now, I don't want something after 10 days from now. What specialty, what visit type, who is the practitioner that I need the appointment with, so that the appointment will duly be reserved for that particular practitioner. What organization, in case this service endpoint is supporting multiple organizations. And then there's also things like location. There is two different variants of location. One is just a simple string, so the server is expected to parse the string. The other one would be a reference to a location resource if that's possible. And I think the expectation here is that you want to put as much intelligence on the server, so be able to pass in a string. Obviously, the server can always say, hey, I didn't know what this location is. Patient is passed in as either a reference or a resource. And the reason for the difference here is it's possible that this patient is not known at the service endpoint. So it's a new patient. In the case of a new patient, there isn't going to be a reference. So you would do a PDQM and you would not find a patient resource there, but you still want to get an appointment. So since you can't send in a reference, this operation allows you to send in a resource. It would probably be a prototypical resource filled out as best as the client can fill out. It might be a copy of a patient resource at the requesting organization in the case of the first use case where it's a post-surgery. But the idea is that if you're passing in the whole resource, the server, again, it's an operation, they can look at that information and agree to create their patient resource, and then the patient will have an identity from that point on. They can also reject it and say, hey, business rules don't allow us to do appointments for patients we don't have. There is also the reason, which is similar to the specialty and the visit type. And then there is the timing element. And this is the timing data type, which is a very complex data type that allows for a far more refined way to specify some kind of timing. So where start and end date, the first two parameters are rather simple. Here's the start, here's the end. Timing allows you to go to do that plus all kinds of other things. It's an optional parameter, as I think almost all of this stuff is, but it allows for cases where you really want to request an appointment with a very specific timing pattern. And then insurance, if appropriate, if known, it certainly never hurts to include insurance plan information if you know it. Again, it's optional, doesn't need to be done. So the idea is the server takes these, uses business rules, and finds optimal appointment or appointments, and returns the bundle. Now, that does not book the appointment. It doesn't hold the appointment. It just says, hey, these are possible appointments. The client can then look at them. And that's an important factor to the second transaction I'm going to talk about, hold appointments, ITI 116. Now, this is an optional transaction. The server does not have to implement it. The client can look at the metadata endpoint of the server's FHIR endpoint to determine that the hold appointment is supported. Hold would be used when you know that there is a significant time, and we don't define what the significance is, but if you're probably not just going to turn around and right away book one of the appointments. So it's going to take some time for the patient to fill out a form. Maybe there's some further information that needs to be filled out, or maybe the patient has to go through some other workflow. If there's some kind of a need to hold an appointment, you can request that an appointment is held. So you pass in the appointment reference, of the one you want to hold. And out will come either the appointment reference indicated as being held or an operation outcome that says, couldn't be done for whatever reason. The amount of time that the server will hold the appointment is also not defined. It's a server specific thing. It's unclear to me how the client would know that timing, or really have a understanding of when hold should be done versus no. If it's 3 seconds between find and book, is probably unlikely to be a problem. So I think there's maybe some metadata that we should put into MCSD, or maybe there's some additional metadata we should put in the metadata endpoint. But again, the idea of hold is to just, the client says, hey, you gave me 5 appointments. This is the one I want to hold, but it might be a minute or 2 before I book it. So it is a fully optional transaction. One of the things I did observe as a potential improvement is, from an IHE perspective, a fully optional service endpoint is really unusual. So I would have expected that there would be a named option for servers to declare when they do support this endpoint. That's not to say that the FHIR metadata discovery mechanism isn't used in real time. So this is not really saying it's a bad process that's in the specification today. But what's missing is, during a purchase situation, you don't know, are you purchasing a server that supports hold or not? So the option would be predominantly to indicate that the server supports the capability. And the metadata endpoint would be the mechanism to determine that it is indeed operational. So a server could support it and it be turned off, those kinds of things. So I did find a few improvement opportunities while putting together these slides. So then there's the book appointment, ITI 117. You pass in the appointment, you pass in the patient resource, and you pass in a comment that would be associated with that particular appointment. So this is used to book the appointment. It's also used to modify. So, for example, if you have booked it in the past and you now want to cancel, you would change your appointment resource and the status of the resource, and you would pass in the resource instead of the reference, and with the cancellation. So there are things that you can modify. There's ways in which you can cancel. So the idea here is that book appointment is kind of a equivalent of a RESTful update, and that the input parameters are either A, a reference because you're just booking it, or B, a copy of the resource, for which you can do that in both cases as well. So this is a little bit more than just book. It's also just update, but predominantly it's going to be used to book the appointment. And then one of the new transactions from the Argonaut, we have the find existing appointment. So this is ITI 118. We have a set of search parameters, and this is just a RESTful interaction. So this is not an operation. This is just a RESTful operation on appointment. So it's the search operation and the search parameters. So there are requirements that, I think there are some combinations of parameters, and I don't know why I didn't put them on the screen. But effectively, you can search by a set of parameters. It's primarily the parameters that you put in when you're searching for an appointment. So this is one of the flow diagrams in the use cases. It shows that, Dr. Brown is using his clinical information system, the quote scheduling client, to find existing appointments. Scheduling server returns some list of appointments. Uh, and I think in this case, yeah, okay, so it's doing 2. Oh, okay, so find existing appointments. That's right. The text with this one is that the doctor wants to make sure that the appointment that they're booking is harmonious with other appointments that the patient has. So first they do the find, the 118. So, hey, does this patient have any appointments? Knowing what the patient has, you then do, find appointments that you might book. Some user interaction to select the appointments, add some additional data, and then you do the book of the appointment. Now, in this one here, it's not using the hold, presumably because the interactions 6, 7, and 8 are not going to take a long period of time, but rather typical of the flow expectation. You could theoretically see the hold transaction somewhere in there as well. So that is the presentation I have on the scheduling profile. It's rather simple, utilizing operations so that the server has freedom of business rules and the ability to create. That timed out. That was unfortunate. um, as with anything, we always accept feedback. You can either put them in through the Google form of the IHE public comments, or you could put them into the Google or through the GitHub issues. And one thing that one of the presentations did is to add these little QR codes. So that's just the QR code to this URL. So, is there any questions?
There is one from Kari in the chat. Can you read it from there?
I probably can if I can figure out how to maximize command. Okay. Yeah, so when you go into presentation mode, the tool goes away. All right. Are there specific operations, etc., for each hold request? Handles one scheduling response at a time, and so many of those initial find responses might become unavailable. Yeah, it is it is possible that between the find and the hold, it's already gone away. There's always a possibility, and even there is warnings in the text that even if you put a hold on something, it doesn't mean that the server is not going to have some other business rule to reject your booking. So it's really not your appointment until you book it. But the idea of the hold is that we recognize sometimes there is a longer period of time between the finding and the booking. And that's also why it's completely optional. the client doesn't have to use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks for that.
And yeah,
I'd have
PCP, sorry about that. Yeah, that's the primary care provider.
Anssi, go ahead.
Have this profile been tried somewhere? Do we know that it
Well,
works in practice?
it's freshly published, 6 days ago. So, we'll see at the potentially in the IHE Connectathon in Canada whether anybody brings it to be tested. But it is, like I said, derived off of Argonaut, so it's not that big of a change, but I have no evidence. Yeah. I do see another question about scheduling for mobile. This is not scheduling for mobile. We don't have it because scheduling for mobile would mean that we have a scheduling implementation guide that used like HL7 V2 or V3 or something like that, and that we reinterpreted it using FHIR. We do not add the word mobile to all implementation guides. We only add the word mobile to implementation guides that are being reevaluated. The use cases are being reevaluated in light of FHIR. So in this case, the scheduling profile comes to us as a set of use cases. We select the best standard, which in this case was FHIR.
I also have a bit wider question. So
Sure.
This is kind of one of the two modes for scheduling. This is, hey, this is my need. Can you give me an appointment or a slot or a few? And then the client is able to select from those. The other alternative is really to expose a full calendar, a schedule with slots, and kind of the client and person using that client together make some reasoning on what kind of slot should be good, and that kind of gives more power to people. Can you talk more about how this was discussed? Are you familiar why Argonaut originally started with this operation-based approach and not the full FHIR scheduling stuff?
Certainly. So the as part of the use cases, we wanted to be able to support, servers that are not, natively FHIR. Essentially with this one, you could get a set of appointment possibilities that is quite broad. You could get a bundle of 100 appointments for which you would have the same situation as you're looking at, right? So this does not impede the use case experience that you're talking about. But by using operations, we enable existing appointment booking systems to have a FHIR-based API without having to support things like slots. So you could, there's nothing wrong with using slots. This was just profiling goals that was part of this use case.
Right, thanks for that.
Yeah.
And for reference, I don't think slots and schedules are a FHIR specific thing. I think they have existed already well before FHIR. I've also been involved in some scheduling projects where those concepts have been used with other
Sure.
APIs, but still,
Yeah.
I understand that operations make sense in this context.
Yeah. If the calendaring world, outside of healthcare, if the calendaring world outside of healthcare was a little bit more standards based, But no, they have, they have lots of standards, and there's lots of non-interoperability between their various standards. So yeah, this is a space that is struggling, and this was our attempt to constrain it in a way that doesn't forbid a system to use slots, but also enables a system that has a different appointment model. And again, if you want to use a different method, fine. There's nothing, it's not like we're saying it's invalid. We're just saying it's not conformant to this profile.
Yep, thanks for that. That's totally fine. Kari has another question in the chat.
Something like having complex timing input results. That is certainly something I asked when I saw the timing parameter. It seems like the timing parameter is opening up a big set of complexity. And it was not clear, what the situation was. But I think so again, maybe there is some profiling of the timing to say, hey, these are the use cases for timing. Like, hey, I want to set up 3 appointments over the next, 3 months that are 3 weeks apart, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's very possible that the timing parameter is not as mature as the rest of the parts. And I'm not sure that timing was part of Argonaut, so it certainly doesn't have experience. But again, I really don't know the answer to that. But yeah,
Any other questions or comments or wishes from the audience? In Finland, we just had a new IHE published for storing a scheduled appointment, the information of that into our core Kanta registry, and HL7 Finland is about to publish another scheduling related IHE early next year. We already have published 2, and now we are combining those into more recent one. So this is certainly helpful, although we are more relying on the base FHIR resources and not the operations in our IHEs.
Okay.
Let's see where the world heads to.
Yeah.
But certainly a timely topic, so to say.
Indeed.
If there are no other questions related to IHE scheduling profile, are there any questions related to any of the previously presented profiles? We still have John on our disposal. So.
Yep.
And if not, then we know that we still have a hold of John in a Zulip, and we can ask further questions and have more discussion there.
Indeed. Indeed.
Thank you very much, John, for being with us all these webinar sessions. It's been
Excellent.
really enlightening.
Yeah, well, I
IHE
really
and
appreciate
relationship.
I really appreciate the offer. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with IHE in Finland. We've seen some enthusiasm and then some downward trend. For instance, the IHE Finland decreased their, or lowered their participation level in IHE
Uh,
Europe or international. Not sure about that, but we're hoping that this webinar series gets some more people interested in IHE in general, and especially on the things that are close to fire.
Yep.
But again, highly appreciate your expertise and your presentations. Let's stay in touch.
Indeed, will do.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.